Hello everyone, welcome back to another lecture for KZN Senior Training, and today we're going to be doing a history lesson on the Industrial Revolution. And this isn't going to be too long, it isn't going to be too in-depth, and it's something that you have learned previously in high school history and maybe even a bit of primary school history. So we're just going to do a basic overview of it and important things that you need to know. So, have you ever heard of the trend called A Day in My Life, where people on YouTube or on TikTok, on Instagram would make these videos detailing what they do on a day-to-day basis, and they try to make it as aesthetic and appealing as possible, as if things are always going great. This girl here has time for health, for cooking, for friends, But have you ever wondered what a day in the life would have been if we were born maybe 300 years ago? And the answer is not as pleasurable as we would expect, because a day in the life a while ago would have been more of a farming agricultural existence, where we wouldn't have the gadgets we have today, but we'd be expected to work on the land and feed ourselves and our families and make goods via that method, and it's not something that was pleasurable or not something that is pleasurable in comparison to what we know today, and because of this agricultural economy, there was a need for something different. And this is where the need for change arose. Because agriculture was tiring, agriculture was inefficient. All we could do was make food for ourselves, make food for our family, and then try and sell it possibly at marketplaces, possibly make some extra money. But was there a way to live a better life, and could more money be made? And this is where the Industrial Revolution comes in, when people moved from an agricultural economy to a more industrial, market-focused economy. So, the Industrial Revolution, first we're going to be talking about the first Industrial Revolution. This occurred or started in Great Britain in the 18th century onwards. And this is, in terms of years, this is from 1760 to approximately 1830. So, the Industrial Revolution shifted societies from an agrarian economy, which is the agricultural lifestyle I just explained, to a manufacturing economy where products were no longer made solely by hand, but by machines. This led to increased production and efficiency, lower prices, more goods, improved wages, and the migration from rural areas to urban areas. And it's important to note that after Britain, many other countries followed suit. For example, the United States of America had their own industrial revolution in inverted commas from the late 19th century onwards. And in this diagram on the left hand side, you can see that the industrial revolution started in Britain around the 1840s and then spread to the rest of Europe, throughout the 1850s to the 1870s, etc. And the Industrial Revolution had various components. So through this revolution, there was now the use of new basic materials such as wool and water. The reason for the wool, quite interestingly, was that Britain had a very damp climate, which is great for growing grass and having lots of fields. And this was very conducive for rearing sheep, so there are a lot of sheep. And as a result, they could harvest wool quite easily. Similarly, with water, there were many, many rivers that they discovered that, we should try and make use of these water sources. So they used it a lot in production lines and as an attempt to make energy from it. There was also the use of new energy sources such as coal and steam. There was the invention of new machines such as spinning jenny, which is this machine you see on the bottom right-hand corner. So basically, what this machine does is it allows you to spin wool and produce garments at a much faster rate than what people previously had to do. Because previously they could only make one garment at a time, really. They had to spin one thread at a time when making a woolen garment. But now with this, they were able to do it much faster. And as a result, they were more productive and could make more goods and sell more goods, right? There was also, importantly, a new organization of work, which is the factory system. So before this industrial revolution, people would just work from their homes. But when this revolution came into play, there was now the creation of factories and production lines where many workers would work together. And there were lots of developments in transportation as well. And you can imagine that at this time, it was a very exciting time around Europe, especially around Great Britain, because this was new. There were new ways to make money. People were getting richer. People were flocking from the rural areas to the urban areas. And it seemed ideally as if it was something that was quite good, quite positive because of the drive to make more money and have a better life. But of course, as with everything, there has to be some drawback. And as a result of all these people crowding in to the urban areas, there was overcrowding. There were then poor living conditions, and there was a class divide between those who were evidently richer and started to own the factories, and the poorer who became more just the working class working in the factories. Also, there was a ton of child labor, and the reason for this is that that was very cheap, and that children were not really able to unionize at that point in time. And however, the workers still earned more in a factory setting compared to the farming or agricultural background that they came from. So as a result, that kept them in these areas because it was bad, but it was still better than where they came from. And this also begs the question of how capitalism started, or how it became even more popular, which would be the root of all evil. Because it is through these factory systems that people then started pursuing these avenues of work, a manufacturing lifestyle over an agricultural one, and the drive for profit was higher than ever. I'm just going to leave these two things here. The Industrial Revolution, where every day was bring your child to work day. That's terrible. I apologize for that. We're going to move on then to the second Industrial Revolution, right? And this happened in the late 19th century to the early 20th century, which is approximately 1870 to 1914. And this was characterized by the building of railroads, large-scale iron and steel production, widespread use of machinery in manufacturing, greatly increased use of steam power, widespread use of the telegraph, petroleum, and the beginning of electrification, right? Electricity. So what must be noted is that with the first industrial revolution, whilst it was booming and there was periods of mass productivity, naturally there had to be a period where it slowed down. So when it did slow down and when it became the norm for everyone to be in these cities such as London and Liverpool and Manchester, and where people were working there, when that became the norm, it was no longer as exciting as it used to be. It was a way to live your life, but it wasn't anything special. And this created the need for a new revolution to make even more money or be even more efficient, right? And that is where the second industrial revolution came about, with the creation of these new inventions to make life better. So what exactly changed, So the second industrial revolution fueled the Gilded Age, which was a period of great extremes, great wealth and widespread poverty, great expansion and deep depression, new opportunities and greater standardization. Economic insecurity became a way of life as the depressions of the 1870s and 1890s put millions out of work or reduced pay. Those who remained in the industrial line of work experienced extremely dangerous working conditions, long hours, no compensation for injuries, no pension, and low wages. But for a limited minority of workers, the industrial system established new forms of freedom. And this was particularly skilled workers who received high wages in industrial work and who oversaw a lot of the production process. So the economic independence now required more technical skill rather than ownership of one's own shop and tools. And it was labeled as progress by its proponents, but those who worked the floor at the factory knew that it came at a price. So what can be seen is that there was this working class that existed. However, there was a differentiation because now there were people that were becoming more skilled, and those were the people who were then able to profit slightly more. And the effect on society of both really the first and the second industrial revolution is that it is not just an economic effect and not just a drive for profit, but it also affected all the realms of society. For example, there were lots of social issues that came about as a result of these industrial revolutions. And as you can imagine, there was the creation of a working class and then also a middle class, the rich and poor divide. And with each industrial revolution came a greater gap between the rich and the poor. It became harder to bridge that gap. And there were also labor issues, strikes, injustices. There was also a political effect because the workers were then able to unionize later on. They formed labor unions. And then there were laws and regulations and contracts and working terms. And there were also the popularism of new belief systems, such as communism, because this belief system would exist in opposition to what the norm was. So people would stand up and say, hey, you know what? I don't like that people are working in these conditions, and that there are those who are getting extremely rich and that there are those who are getting extremely poor. I believe that we should own the means of production, which is how it used to be a while ago. So you can see how the Industrial Revolution was a breeding ground for issues that were beyond economics, issues of society, social issues, political issues, legal issues. issues of belief systems. So the whole point of this slide is just to make it known that the Industrial Revolution is more than economics. And this can also be used in debating, because we often argue a lot of social issues or political issues and we look at where they came from. But it's also important to understand the context, because people didn't just wake up one day and decide to be communists. These ideals came from somewhere. It was something that spurred people on to want to think in new ways and want to have different things. So that is the point of this slide. Now we can look at the third industrial revolution. So we've covered the two. The third industrial revolution is a little bit more familiar to us. We haven't really lived through this revolution fully, but this is more our parents' age of industrial revolution, parents or grandparents. They would understand this a lot more because they witnessed it. So this was the digital revolution from 1969 onwards, where we got computers, cell phones, and then much later on the internet, and we had unlimited access to information, unlimited profit, and a fast rate of global advancement. This is something that doesn't require explanation. We all know how crazy the world went when there were cell phones invented, as you can see in the top right. Then an example of like an old computer there at the bottom. Then the other picture on the right is In Search of Gold, We Lost a Diamond. Now that diamond was one of these old Nokia phones, which you don't see anymore. That phone could last for almost 3 days on one charge. That's how long its battery life was. And if you threw that phone off a building and it landed on the ground, it would not break. It was virtually indestructible. So there were a lot of stuff that were being developed at this point in time that were very valuable, and allowed us to make a lot of profit, and create a lot more businesses. But as with everything, there were drawbacks. So there became the issues of copyright and trademark issues, information sharing and stealing, privacy issues. These were especially more known towards the 2000s, when we started getting more smartphones and easier access to the internet, etc. But the important common problem from the 1960s onwards was the impact of automation on jobs, because now a computer could do your work or assist you in doing that work. So your job had to transition from being the person who does the work to being the person who operates the computer, or to not having a job at all. So it was a big change that many people had to go through. And this is something that we are seeing currently today as well, which is why we may be still feeling some impact of the third industrial revolution. However, what people nowadays call it is a fourth industrial revolution, which is what we're currently going through. And I'll touch on that a little bit later. So what are some key takeaways that we can gather from what we've discussed? Each revolution had a time period, so it was the first, the second, the third. The time periods were different, and each revolution had a period where it was the best thing on this earth. It was incredibly productive, and then it stagnated a bit, and that necessitated a new revolution to change the way we are able to better our lives, right? And each revolution had a cause, generally the drive for a better standard of living. Each, of course, had pros and cons, but it would be useful for you to do further research on how these revolutions impacted possibly social movements at the times, and just to have a general idea, of what caused these revolutions, and also what were some further effects of them. An opportunity for reflection is that because of the Industrial Revolution, we are able to do anything we want to today. Everything that we are currently is because we had industrial revolutions. The mere fact that we can watch this lecture that I'm doing right now, or the fact that I can record this lecture, is proof that we have industrialized and evolved to a point at which we can do this via a laptop. The mere fact that I could listen to like Drake's album that came out last Friday is proof of the Industrial Revolution. Although I'm not sure that it was a good thing, given how incredibly underwhelming the album was. The mere fact that we can debate and have opportunities for intellectual discussion instead of having to work in agricultural fields is proof of Industrial Revolution, and we are able to see its effects in our everyday lives. It's almost that we live in a bubble. But another important thing to mention is that a lot of the things that I mentioned, such as the cons of Industrial Revolution, such as child labor or people having to work as a working class in factories, a lot of these issues are still prevalent today. And that is also proof of the Industrial Revolution. Because as we mentioned, with each Industrial Revolution, the gap between the rich and the poor widened. And it is terribly unfortunate that a lot of people haven't been able to make it past those initial stages that everyone was once in the Industrial Revolution, and it's evidence of us as a global economy not being able to see to the needs of everyone efficiently. But it also begs the question of whether it was just inevitable, whether that was bound to happen anyway. That's just some food for thought. But this is just a nice summary on the slide here of the four industrial revolutions. So we're looking at our current age as a fourth industrial revolution. So just a summary, the first industrial revolution, remember, around the 1700s, was where we had mechanization, steam power, weaving loom, wool, all of those things, right? We can produce more goods. Second industrial revolution was where we had a lot more mass production, the assembly line, electrical energy, and then we also mentioned a lot of iron and steel, electricity, all of that very important, right? Then the third industrial revolution is where we got automation, where we got computers, electronics. And then the fourth industrial revolution is where we have cyber physical systems, the Internet of Things, networks. And then I also believe that part of the fourth industrial revolution is what we're going through currently, which is a mass increase in the usage of artificial intelligence. Because if you had to think about it, to us, our laptops and our phones aren't really interesting anymore. We don't have a craze about them like how people in the 70s, 80s, 90s did, right? To us, it is almost expected that everyone should have a phone or have a laptop or be able to access the internet. But something that's a bit more exciting to us is the potential of AI or the potential of the future automation of jobs, even further. So that is also proof that we may be living in the fourth industrial revolution, where we are moving to that sort of age. And that's quite interesting to think about. Here's some references. And that concludes the presentation. Thank you very much. I hope you learned something. And if you didn't, which is okay too, I hope this was a much needed opportunity for reflection and an understanding of what happened during these industrial revolutions and how we came from the first industrial revolution to where we are today. And that should also be an opportunity for great gratitude that we are able to do this and that we are able to exist in the spaces we exist today because of the initial industrial revolution. Okay, thank you very much.